Hello, my name is Mike Anderson. I am with Lakeside Chamber of Commerce. I'm a director here, and the Lakeside Western Days Parade is coming up soon, August 28th. Starts at 9:35 in the morning. The theme this year is Thank You Healthcare Workers, and it really ties in well with our Grand Marshal, who's Dr. Ben Aaron, who was a doctor who was 40 years ago was on the team, and he'll tell you more about it, that extracted the bullet from our President Reagan when he was nearly assassinated. So, Ben?
My floor.
Yeah, well, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself and how you kind of ended up there to begin with,
Okay. Well, I was born and grew up in Missouri, just another Midwest kid, and went to the University of Missouri pre-med, and then went to the University of Texas for medical school. And the Navy offered me a year of my tuition there, and I joined up. And so I began a 22-year stint in the Navy at that time, and that actually guided a good deal of our lives, and the reason we wound up here is the reason I say. Because in the course of the Navy thing, we had 4 daughters, and my last 2 of our daughters, we left on the the East Coast, when we left there to come out here to take over my position at the Naval Hospital in Balboa. I was chief of thoracic surgery at that time. And of course we had 2 other daughters with us, and they settled down out here, had husbands and settled down out here and started families. And so this went on. I retired from the Navy in 1996. No, that was not correct. I'm getting my time here. That was in 1979. And I went to work for George Washington University in Washington, D.C. at that time on the faculty. And that set me on a sort of a different path, because a year or so after I arrived there, I was chief of thoracic at George Washington University, and President Ronald Reagan came in after an assassin tried to do him in at the Washington Hilton Hotel. So when he came into our hospital, and because he had a chest wound, I was tagged to be his surgeon and manage his case for the ensuing 11 days in the hospital.
11 days.
Yeah. Well, they didn't want to rush him out there.
No.
Till he could walk out and wave at everybody. That was it. So anyway, that colored my time in Washington, D.C. a great deal, of course. And when I retired in 1996 from that job, we had family out here and whatnot. And I remember at the time we lived out here in the late 70s, I lived in Alpine. And I used to come home in the evening from a long day, and I'd look around and I'd say, gee, this would be a great place to live if you didn't have to work for a living. So I sort of remembered that, actually. And so when I retired from the Navy, and my wife really had no interest in staying in D.C., I found D.C. to be a very fascinating place, but she didn't want to stay there for the rest of our lives. And so we moved out here and retired to Lakeside. Now the reason we're in Lakeside is because our youngest daughter had married a Lakeside kid, Rick Barker, who ran Barker Realty, and they'd settled here. And one day we were at their house. This was actually before I retired, looking out across the way, and spotted a piece of land across the way from from their house. So we went over and looked at it, and we bought this piece of land, and ultimately built a house there. So that was our retirement home, right here in Lakeside, on Vista del Capitan. So anyway, we've lived there ever since. We've traveled a lot and done a lot of things. I had an airplane when I retired, and housed it at Gillespie Field, and we did some fair amount of flying until I had to give up the airplane. And So it's been a long tour now. We've lived in Lakeside for about 23 years now.
Yeah, well, that's when I met you. I mean, years
Yes.
ago with when I worked for Rick Barker, and I knew Rick and Don, and we played some golf together here and there, and we
Oh, yeah.
went to see the Yankees beat up on the Padres in the World Series.
Oh boy,
Unfortunately,
did they beat up on it?
yeah, and some things like that. But back to the incident. Now, I understand that you were the one that actually, as they were looking for the bullet in his lung or in his chest, that you were actually the one that discovered. Is that correct?
Well, I was the chief surgeon in that
Okay.
case, and I had a hand-selected team of 2 besides me.
Mm.
There were an awful lot of people wanting to get in on it, surgeons, and I said, no, I think that would just complicate the matter. So I had my chief resident in thoracic surgery there at GW was my assistant, and we had an intern that was on the service at the time, and that was our team.
Oh, okay.
And so in the course of looking for the bullet was had propelled itself into his left lung and had housed right behind his heart. And in the course of looking for that, because the bullet was relatively small and kind of flattened from hitting the car before it hit him.
Oh.
And so we had a little trouble finding that bullet. So there was a little bit of angst about that, expressed, and finally I devised a way to pin it down and find lung substances is very soft and mushy, so when you squeeze it, things always move away from your fingers. That's why we had the trouble finding the bullet. But it wasn't far from the other side of the lung, and so we just opened the other side of the lung when we had located it. Made a little incision in the lung and extracted the bullet and put a little suture in the vessel that had been bleeding and had brought him to the operating room. And the case was pretty simple, straightforward for a thoracic surgical case. The only issue was it was the President of the United States.
Right.
That was
And there's that.
There's that.
Well, you know, it works out really well that you're here and that you're one of the healthcare people we're thanking. And of course, I'm sure you've been called a hero many times, but I think it's apropos. Just out of, maybe as a closing note, any sort of some side note or something kind of unusual or interesting to people that you might want to add?
Well, it was. I can say this: it was an exciting day.
Mm.
My day started out just like every other day did, and then in early afternoon, I was also involved in taking care of the President of the United States. So that was a bit of a change.
Mm.
And there were a lot of things, like in the operating room, he was going to sleep, and with his anesthesia, and he opened his eyes and sat up on the operating table, looked around. Everybody was standing around watching him, with a lot of the Secret Service people.
Sure.
And he looked around and he said, "I sure hope you all are Republicans." Oh yeah, and he was full of stuff like that. And then he put him to sleep when we did the surgery. It was there were a few little squeaky things that went on in his recovery, but all in all, it went pretty smoothly.
Mm.
And then I made 2 house calls afterwards to the White House.
Oh, okay. Follow up with your patient, huh?
Oh yeah, I had to go interview the patient. So the first time I saw him a month after surgery, he was lying in the Lincoln bed in the Lincoln room on the 2nd floor of the White House, the living quarters.
Mm-hmm.
And walking into that room was really something else, because the bed was huge, and there was a huge picture of Lincoln over the bed. And the whole thing was tailored for this man that was about 6'5" or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And then I came back 6 weeks after that, and he was, by that time he was up and about and doing his work, and it was just a perfunctory kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an interesting, exciting time. Fortunately, as a lot of people have commented, it turned out well.
Yeah.
Because in the other 4 attempted assassinations where all the presidents died, all the doctors involved were vilified. They'd all done something wrong because the president had died. And there's no way to win that scenario
Sure.
if the president dies for whatever reason, whether you're involved with it or not, as the doctor, you get blamed for it.
Mm.
So anyway, that was very fortunate.
No pressure.
No pressure. And so he, a year later, I and the 2 residents that were involved with his care. 2 residents in our resident training program volunteered to do 24 hours on and 24 hours off, so that he would have a physician near him full time. And those 2 residents and I went to the White House, and we interviewed the president a year later in the White House library, which is pretty interesting too. And he asked a lot of interesting questions.
Mm.
But he was doing fine by that time.
Right. Well, now I understand that the bullet, I heard a little about the story. Of course, you didn't get to keep the bullet, but the
No.
bullet is at the presidential library up in.
I have no idea where the bullet is.
Okay, somebody mentioned that the other day.
Well, when I took the bullet out and dropped it into a container, and it was just a paper cup, but it was the first step in the line of custody in evidence that was going to be presented in court against this fellow who attempted to assassinate him.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that time, I have an excellent picture that was introduced in court of the bullet, but I really do not know. It's probably, I asked somebody that once, I thought might know, and he said, oh, it's probably in FBI archives.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they keep all that stuff and log it in. And it isn't in the library, I don't think, because I've been to the library a couple times, and I was never, matter of fact, I was there with the fellow who ran the library one time, who was taking me and my guests around, and he never said anything. We used to look at the whole library and everything related to Reagan. There was no bullet in all of that.
Well, I may have been misinformed or something.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you being here, and if you guys want to come on out to the parade on the 28th, 9:30 in the morning, Ben will be the Grand Marshal in an open vehicle, and hopefully with a little sunshade, because I expect to be fairly sunless.
I may get a Mexican sombrero. That would be great.
Good Lapa Lapa.
Great shade, yeah. You bet.
So, again, appreciate it. We appreciate your being, whether you're a Republican or not, we appreciate the fact that you.
I'll say it straight out, I'm a Republican, I make no bones about it.
All right. Well, thank you again, Ben.
All right.
And we'll
Mike.
see you again in
You bet.
couple weeks.
Gotta support the local economy.
Absolutely. So.